Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 7 of the Climate podcast. And today I'm joined by Denis De Barnardy, who's got a awesome presentation for us. And I'm really excited to hear, to get to see everything that he's got prepared and just to hear his perspective. And he's got some very interesting perspectives on the climate con itself and how, there's an interesting article, Soil Not Oil. I like how it helps stop the agenda, and I like that one. That sounded cool. And he's had some dealings with climate activists before, and I think you guys are going to absolutely love his presentation. So, hey, Denis, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no worries, man. And we've got you joining all the way from southern Mexico, which is, you can see this beautiful backdrop he's got there is actually in the jungle. But do you want to give a bit of an introduction to yourself before we jump into your presentation?
Sure. It's actually part of the presentation, but let's go. I'm an engineer by training, and I have a number of environmental concerns that have been with me since I'm a young adult, so about since 20 years ago or so. And I actually believed in the con for the longest of time until I actually got involved. And I got involved thinking, well, like if we can't have an industrial society, it was pretty clear to me that they're given the narrative, then necessarily there's going to be an energy problem to sort, and we're going to need to decrease the energy that we consume. I eventually got into agroecology and permaculture. But with this being said, I did have a few reservations about the climate con by then. So I was already thriving about the importance of the water cycle on climate. I had heard about the climate gate emails and so forth. So I knew there was something fishy, but it's only when I got deep into the details that my mind was completely blown away. So I was basically too busy for my entire life to actually pay attention to any of this. And it's only when I looked deep and actually got involved, really. So I actually joined an small environmental group at one point to promote agroecology as a potential solution. And the pushback I got was what ultimately triggered me the most and got me into this work that I'm about to present now.
Awesome. Cool, man. Well, yeah, let's jump in. Let's see what you got for us.
So I run a you can see my screen?
Yep.
Yes.
We're going.
Full screen. All right. So I actually run a website which a Substack which is called Natural Language. The URL is at the end of the presentation, and we discussed three things on the website, mostly environmental big lies and the carbon accounting chicanery, which we are about to get into. I also have a few articles on actual solutions, but more on that later, because I wouldn't want to give the impression that we actually need to fix what they say we need to fix. But there are environmental problems that we do need to fix, which we'll eventually get into. So awesome. A very brief introduction on the big lies that triggered me. First off, green tech. So I suppose that most of your audience is not getting red pills here, so I'm going to go really fast on this. Green tech is actually a pretext for military-driven mining. If you look into what is actually using the military, the minerals, it's actually the military by very, very far. And the Silicon Valley, for those who are not privy with it, was actually started by the military-industrial complex. For those who do not know about this, there's a fantastic presentation by Steve Blank on the history of Silicon Valley that I wholeheartedly recommend. Green tech is of course not enough if you follow the narratives. You also need carbon allowances, taxes, offsets, and there's actually a bigger picture thing going on here, which is the nature-based solutions, which is basically an effort to turn all of nature into a financial asset class, which is completely bonkers. And this is giving rise to a control infrastructure with all the CBDC nonsense that we hear that they tried to set up with the pandemic, during the pandemic. There's also the carbon capture and storage, and we're going to talk a lot about this during the presentation. But what matters here is there's two aspects. There's the capture at the there's the capture itself for the carbon that is inevitable, such as electricity production from coal power stations and so forth. And then you transport that carbon dioxide and you have to store it somewhere. And there's two main classes of storage that are of interest. One is underground storage by fossil fuel giants. This is really a subsidies because when you pump the carbon dioxide, pressurized carbon dioxide down, the oil goes up. So this is really a way to subsidize fossil fuel giants, which is hilarious when you think about it. And it's also a way to fund the tree plantation operators because tree planting projects, most of them are really commercial tree plantations, like rubber or teak or that kind of thing. And so really when you're buying carbon offsets, you're actually funding these people, which is bonkers as well. And those tree plantations, they happen on people's lands. And this is where the conservancies come into play. And these are an instrumental part of the green agenda that completely fly under the radar in Western Europe in the media, including in, I dare say, including in independent media. Much more attention needs to go onto the conservancies because they're basically working on stealing a third of the global land mass and water mass, which is an incredible amount of real estate, and to put that into the receivership of conservancies. But the conservancies then they basically let their buddies in. So it's a you scratch my back, I scratch yours type of arrangements, and they all work with one another. And so conservancies, they kick out the locals, which is critical for mining, and then they start mining, they start planting trees on areas that should not be there, and so on and so forth. And there's, of course, the weather engineering angle that gets described as cranked territory, but I invite anyone who thinks that to actually click those links. There's the links are all in the presentation that will be posted in the show notes. Absolutely look into Dane Wigington's work if you're not already probably the geoengineering. Now, the science itself has all sorts of problems that warrant attention as well. It's doctored research. First off, the consensus is manufactured. For anyone who thinks that there is actually a consensus, it's doctored research that ignores all sorts of things, including, and this to me was a real shocker because I know a thing or two about data engineering. Like a basic modeling principles are just thrown out the window. There's no error. There's no error reporting. There's no. They're just. They don't worry about the data quality. They don't worry about. It's just completely bonkers, and there's overfitting all over the place. Also interesting to me, because I studied psychology at one point as a student, were the Malthusian and religious twists. I invite anyone who is unfamiliar with those to look into James Lindsay's work on the Gnostic secret religions. There's an aura of inevitability in the discourse that is absolutely worth pointing out. Like it's something that nature imposes itself onto you, and you cannot do a thing. And so there's overshoot because there's too many people, and it completely discounts the effects of land stewardship on climate itself, which we'll get to, but also on our ability to affect those problems and to make nature better for us. And I was all the more privy about this that I was working into agroecology by then. So there's that too. So more on that later. The image here is worth paying attention. For those who are not aware, there's this NASA mission called Orbiting Carbon Observatory. They're looking for 50% of the carbon. They don't understand where 50% of the fossil fuel that was emitted into the atmosphere disappeared. They have no idea where it is. and they cannot account for it. So they have this whole mission, like there's like, I don't know how many dozens of people working on this topic internally, trying to figure out where it is. And I bring this to your attention because mine, and this is the topic of today's presentation, it's like the science is actually so bad that it doesn't even get the CO2 attribution right. So what do I mean by this? We first need to take a step back and discuss canopy loss. Now, the giveaway for me was biomass energy. This is reviled by just about everyone in the left and right in both on both sides of the debate. It basically turns trees, or more specifically tree waste, into wood pellets that then get burned for energy in households, but also to produce electricity. So we're basically burning our forests. And in the UK, it's especially appalling because of drax. But they're in Korea, it's no better. They're basically mixing coal with biomass pellets, and then they're subsidizing that as green energy, which is absolutely laughable. Anyway, the gist of it is that the basis for calling it green is that carbon accounting works by counting two types of emissions. There's the biogenic emissions, so the natural ones, if you will, and then there's the man-made emissions, to which they tacked on a whole bunch of other things like cow farts and things like that, and cow burps. And so those are really counted separately. Now, because the biogenic emissions of cutting wood are already counted as land use emissions, and those are counted as zero because you replant the trees, so there's no land use change, and so that counts as zero. And then on the other hand side, to avoid double counting, you get to burn the waste, which was already counted as zero energy, to avoid double counting into the reporting. And so that's why when you burn a wood pellet, counts as zero energy. Now, of course, the green advocates, they don't like that, and they're constantly looking into arguing like, no, but this actually produces carbon emissions, so we need to stop this. But that's actually the tip of the iceberg. And to me, it was the giveaway because I was writing about this. I wrote a book, basically, which is what started my my Substack. And I wanted to have a full computation of what was actually going on. My book originally was just like to denounce the solution, but when this is what made it click to me while I was writing. And so when you clear a forest, the thing to be aware of is you have all of this bare soil that is left over that you can see on the image. And all of that, the wood on the ground, the roots underground, the dying fungi, everything is just emitting carbon dioxide. And there's no trees. There's no trees to soak that up. And so that creates a plume of carbon dioxide, which is avoidable. You basically avoid it by thinning a forest instead. And as we'll get to later, it's not negligible at all. And so it highlights the importance of trees. Now, this soaking up of CO2 is absolutely not present, for anyone who is paying attention, in carbon cycle visualizations. So this chart here is interesting because it contrasts what goes on in the ocean, where you see a cycle which represents actually the interactions between that occur at the ocean surface. So you have, there's an air exchange on the one hand side, there's a net intake that goes underground, and in between they fuel each other, right? And that is absolutely not present on the other side of the chart. You see the air going directly from soil to the atmosphere, and directly from the atmosphere into the soil. But there's no, and I believe it's actually very deliberate that they're doing this, that they're completely ignoring the fact that a lot of the soil carbon goes directly into the plants. They just don't show that. And so that brings me to a counter narrative for what is actually going on, because no one can deny that the uptake in carbon dioxide. What I think actually happens is a number of changes that occurred during the industrial era. One is loggers switched to clear cutting. So they used to thin forests, and that was standard procedure. And then overnight, especially with the advent of, it was before the advent of chainsaws, but chainsaws accelerated that process. Overnight, you began seeing like whole swaths of forest becoming cleared and spewing carbon dioxide until the trees would grow back up. In the farm fields, there were a number of changes as well. There were fewer landowners because of the population migration to the cities, and industrialized farming, which took over. And so you knock down the hedgerows so that to make the best of your tractors and harvesters. There were other canopy related changes. In the US Midwest, remember, the Midwest got colonized, settled during the second half of the 19th century, which incidentally is when the carbon dioxide starts to rise, right? And so you had all these prairies, really. And what happens in the prairies, you have some bisons who are roaming around. They graze a bit here, they graze a bit there, they get hunted by the native locals, and so the bisons move around basically. They never get a chance to completely overgraze an area, and so that keeps the prairie healthy. And overnight, the settlers move in. They have overgrazed paddocks full of cows. They plow everything because the technology allows it. This was the advent of steel plows, which was contemporary at the same time. The Great Steppes, you have a similar process. It used to be that it was all horses basically roaming in that area, and then it became farmlands, industrialized farmlands. There's also deforestations in the Brazilian, in the Amazon and elsewhere, but mostly in the Amazon and Indonesia quite a bit as well. I think dead waters might also, like mangroves, for instance, they got killed, and so you have a lot of carbon dioxide, lots of carbon in the soil and those things, and lots of carbon that might go in there. And so this would provide an alternative explanation to where this carbon dioxide comes from. And if correct, then the plumes are very easy to curb. Basically, you put plants back in. And so that means switching back to forest thinning, or there's this thing practiced by a company called Suzano, which is a giant logging corporation that's based in Brazil. What they do is they have this mosaic system. And so you have like a square types of fields with commercial plantations in the middle, and then you have a band all around it of native species, which they keep from harvest to the next. And so this is to accommodate for the wildlife, but it's very possible that that also helps for the carbon emissions, the biogenic emissions, and to avoid the plumes because it blocks the wind, and then the plants have more time to soak that up. On farm fields, you use alley cropping or intercropping. So intercropping is like you plant directly in clover, for instance. There's all sorts of strategies where you can grow multiple plants together on top of each other or next to one another, which is another possibility. And even for grazers, there you can raise them using rotational grazing or using silvopasture, which is you make the cows graze underneath trees. They love it because I mean, there's all sorts of good reasons to do that. And it doesn't need to have much impact on the crop yields either. You could imagine having the forest, the hedgerows around the field be short cycle coppice species, and you hammer them every 7 years. Trees don't grow that much in first 5-10 years. It doesn't create much shade. You get some extra biomass to create wood pellets, which in this case would be useful. It has very little impact on the overall yield of a field by doing that, and that would reduce these plumes, and it would also solve the biodiversity loss, which is an actual problem. And as proof of this, take roadsides, which are like havens, or rewilded gardens, which are also wildlife havens. All of these would have an impact on the biodiversity loss. The only open question really on this is how to, what are the best approaches to avoid these CO2 plumes. Now, my sense is that there's a chicanery going on and a very deliberate one. Now, but I'd like to start by exonerating the forestry modelers because they're actually competent, and like as an engineer, I understand what they were doing, because they're using these Markov chain-based models, basically, which consist in having a transition matrix. And if this and that situation arose, and you have probability of this, probability of this, probability of that, and so you take this carbon stock from one discrete state to the next, year after year, season after season, depending on the conditions that they were in. And this is a sound choice because you cannot monitor the carbon stocks of a forest using continuous tracking. It's just being completely impractical. So what that does in practice is it takes a snapshot every now and then of the carbon stocks, which is the net contribution of the plumes and absolutely not the plumes. And so this means that these plumes, they go completely uncounted and unreported. And I get a lot of pushback by people when I point this out, and they say, no, there's land use for A1, forest land, remaining forest land. This is where it gets reported. Actually, if you actually look into that, it's based on models. It's based on these models. It's a snapshot using translation matrices to take a snapshot of the carbon stocks, and you move that from one reporting event to the next. And so, no, they don't get counted and they don't get reporting. The carbon accounting is very interesting when you take a deep dive. It basically works like a financial balance sheet, like a financial statement, sorry. You have cherry-picked emissions, which are reducible expenses, and they get vilified as such. Like, you must reduce fossil fuels, you must reduce the meat consumption to avoid the cow burps, like, you know the drill. And on the other hand, you have carbon stocks, which are more like balance sheet entries. And they're tracked as stock changes, and they keep the emissions, what goes on inside them, out of view and out of scrutiny. And that makes sense if and only if those emissions are negligible. So let's have a look at that. So logging emissions are a few kilos per square meter between the moment where you harvest the wood and the moment where the new trees have grown enough to soak up all of the carbon that is being emitted by the soil. You get, depends on the landscape. In this particular example, it's 5 kilos. It depends, and they stop the experiment after that, so it's actually more. But it really depends on the landscape. It's enormous. It's about 10 tons per acre, give or take, as a ballpark number to have in mind. It's absolutely, like when you see a cleared forest and this is not 1 acre when they do this. It's like hectares on hectares, dozens, hundreds of hectares, completely cleared forest, right? That 10 tons per acre of carbon dioxide. And loggers clear over year in, year out, they clear over 16 million acres. Now, when you do this means that basically you have a German economy worth of carbon dioxide emissions right there and there. They do not get accounted for. They go completely under the radar, which is absolutely bonkers. And the kicker to me was reduced impact logging. Now, this is basically, it's a set of techniques, including forest thinning and like best practices to store carbon and to avoid the carbon dioxide emissions. Wonder why, right? Because they're aware of these plumes. And so basically, the loggers, they're going to pocket carbon offsets paid by guilt-tripped consumers to get their act together and curb the plumes. And these carbon offsets are going to be based on the energy consumption of consumers, which, as we're about to see, are absolutely not the problem. So if you look at farming emissions, they vary absolutely wide. They vary very widely. It's a factor of 30 if memory serves or something like that. Like it's the carbon emissions from one field to another. There's no, you can't really compare them, but they're also very localized. Now, in this specific example, it's a few grams, 5.9 if memory serves in this example. When you no-till, and by the way, when you no-till as an industrial farmer, that means applying herbicides. It means you spray glyphosate on your field or equivalent, and you knock out every weed in order to clear the entire field. That's no-till. It's not the same way you do it when you're a market garden farmer. Market gardener. to a couple dozens grams. So in this example, it varies between 22-ish to 82 or 83, if memory serves me up. So basically, it's about 25 kilos or 100 to 400 kilos per acre of carbon dioxide. And just to put this in perspective, there's 340 million acres of farmlands, which are, and not all farmlands are work the same. You need to look at which ones are under temporary crops. Those are the ones that you till year after year, as opposed to when you're farming perennials, where you do not need to till year after year, right? So just the farms that are under temporary crops, there's 340 million acres. And if you take the minimum lower bound, 25 kilos, that right there is 8.5 gigatons of carbon dioxide. If it's tilled, and there's 50% of US croplands is tilled, so you should have, for half of that, basically you should be multiplying that by between 4 and 16, which is quite wild. 4.5 gigatons. For perspective, the US industrial emissions is 5 gigatons, give or take, at the moment. So it's a whole order of magnitude more than industrial emissions. Yeah, basically. And it's so high that you can actually tell when farmers are tilling, harvesting, or using fire to clear field. Now, these screenshots are from a video that NASA produced. On the left, this is like middle of the winter. You would expect this to be the top peak carbon dioxide if it was a fossil fuel problem, because that's when we're heating, right? The second screenshot to the top right is what happens in the spring when the farmers are on their tractors. As you can see, the whole thing is just full of carbon dioxide. If you, anyone who watches the video, just turn the sound off and just appreciate what is actually going on. It's based on models, by the way, and I do not think that the models are correct for the dynamics, but the models are actually based on the carbon dioxide readings as they best understand them on the ground. So the source, the animations are probably incorrect, but the source of the location of the carbon CO2 sources are. Then during the summer, basically all the plants soak all of it up. What's an interesting point to be aware of is that a lot of the carbon dioxide migrates in their animation to the North Pole. And during the autumn and early winter, when the farmers are harvesting or planting winter crops, you have the whole process over again. And then the plants soak it up again, which is crazy as well. And but there's a lot less light in the Arctic, so you have lingering carbon dioxide in the North Pole. So hence my conclusion, which is that the science is actually confusing a canopy loss problem for an energy problem. Now, fossil fuels could still have a contribution to all of that, of course. Now, and the discourse about fossil fuels is that the isotopic analysis say it's fossil fuel carbon dioxide. So 2 points on that. One is you cannot tell from analyzing the air, the isotopes in the carbon dioxide in the air, if plants have cycled the carbon dioxide first or not. What you would need to do to actually prove or disprove that is to go next to a highway, for instance, and to take samples of plants in that area and see if the plants are collecting the carbon dioxide at that point. Same thing for urban vegetation, like trees or grass clippings and things like that. My hunch is that you would find a lot of carbon dioxide in those cases. Can't prove it. There's no research that I'm aware of that I could find that studies that, but my hunch is that this is what you'd find. Secondly, there's only 12% of the carbon dioxide is actually tied to fossil fuel based on the recent research. If you haven't had him on your show, I would suggest that you do, because his paper is all over the place in climate circles. Now, I think we can all agree that the pandemic exonerated fossil fuels, and the reason is that the carbon dioxide increased like clockwork during the lockdowns. So basically because of this. And so that points to where is this carbon dioxide coming from? There's, of course, the tilling. I think that there's also the sources with little or no nearby plants, such as plains and industrial smokestacks. Now, and yeah, there's not much to like about fossil fuel. For any like would-be defenders of fossil fuel, there's a lot to dislike about them, or all mining really. But at the same time, you know, energy is critical and carbon dioxide too. And so, from lack of better options, for now it's fossil fuel that we're using. I think that in the future we'll be using low energy nuclear reactions or something like that. But
Yeah,
anyway,
but hold up. There was a slide there you skipped by, or is it next?
oh
Yeah,
yeah,
that
oh
one.
yeah.
Let's focus on that for a minute, because obviously you've been speaking about obviously how all of these emissions and CO2, but it's like, well, actually,
yeah, it's plant food.
CO2 is plant food.
Absolutely, it's plant food, and it's more than that. Like we, there's this idea among in climate skeptic circles that if we go beneath a certain threshold, then the plants will die, and that's true experimentally. I have a quibble with that theory, which is that plants have been struggling and evolving and adapting to ever lower and lower and lower and lower carbon dioxide in the atmosphere for a number of reasons in the past several millions of years, tens, dozens of millions of years. Basically, you have shell animals and like bones and things like that, which and also natural processes like stalactites, stalagmites that calcify the carbon dioxide and other mineralization processes. Basically, nature is removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and has been for millions and millions and millions of years. So the plants have been adapting the whole time. So I don't think that the plants would die if they just evolve if the carbon dioxide lowered. But anyway, the plants are still very much able to survive when there's a lot more carbon dioxide, which is the point of this slide, which is like, this is the first slide, the first image to the left is pre-industrial. And the last one is like what happens in a greenhouse. In a commercial greenhouse, you actually increase it until 1,000, 1,200 parts per million. And the reason is that after there's like a diminishing return after a certain point, and like plants love having carbon dioxide, but past a certain point they're like, okay, there's enough. I don't need more. It lowers water consumption, which is as well, which is why the deserts, part of why the deserts are greening and arid areas are greening across the world. It's also because of that. The plants grow faster, and they grow faster by using less water. So we can use that fact with open air diffusers. So there's an experiment that was done by the US Department of Agriculture, which has these devices like the one that's pictured here, which are they're glorified drip irrigation systems where, but except that they release carbon dioxide. And my contention is that you could take a smokestack, right? So you take the chimney, then you do it like a rocket mass heater. So for people who don't know what a rocket mass heater is, you capture the output of the chimney by placing a can, like a barrel over it, really. And then you take the heat back down, you pass it through a mass, which stores the heat, and that keeps your house warm. And so, by the way, for anyone who is going to struggle with their heating bill this summer, who has a house and who can actually make one of these, you will not find any cheaper option to heat your house, because it stores the heat and then releases it throughout the night or throughout the day. So you can heat your house using a fraction of the firewood, and you can use small wood from your tree prunings and things like that, or from stickwood picked up in the forest to heat your house using that. Anyway, so you could filter that output out of industrial smokestack. And this is important because these things are often acidic. There's lots of sulfuric acids and things like that. So you absolutely don't want that inside your plants. But for the rest, you could just basically use it as is. You use the heat, you put it to good use. So you heat some water, for instance, and send it to a city, or you dry some biomass or some wood pellets or whatever. You pipe that towards plants using big pipes, and then you use these diffusers and a drip irrigation system to make use of the cooled down water vapor, which is now water, and the carbon dioxide, which in this case would be direct, like air, compressed air essentially. And you could grow hemp that way. Hemp is a wonderful plant that soaks up toxins and has a whole bunch of industrial uses, in particular construction, which is reviled by climate activists like you, cement. You can use hemp. It's also paper. You can make paper using hemp. You can make plastic using hemp. Like it has all sorts of useful products that you can make. In addition to, of course, smoking it. But you wouldn't want to smoke the hemp that comes out of an industrial fertilized using a industrial smokestack, I think, because of all the toxins. But for industrial uses, obviously you can use that to make housing and things like that. Or you could just let the carbon dioxide escape. As you can see, and this is from NASA's data. It's the Mauna Loa Observatory. I don't think there's a link on that, but it's easy to find. It's basically the wiggle that goes up and down, up and down. It doesn't go up continuously throughout the year. It goes up and down, up and down. And if you pay attention, the lower bar is like is what the high was several years earlier. So it's really not a problem capturing any of or curbing if the carbon dioxide was a problem, then it would be very easy to curb and to remove, to get rid of. So there's really no emergency whatsoever. Now, to get back to an earlier picture, we can piece the story together for the missing carbon dioxide. So plants soak it up, then biology moves it around inside the soil and moves it around between plants. Like an animal eats a plant, takes a dump elsewhere, and puts some carbon. Like biology really does move carbon. We are the biggest carbon mover, in fact. Our fishermen are. We take all the carbon out of the oceans, and then all of that is organic waste that we end up putting on our fields. So and then clearing those fields releases some of that carbon dioxide. The wind moves it around, especially towards North Pole because of the Coriolis effect. Plants, especially algae in that area, soak it up. Then biology moves it around again, hence fishermen. And so we have a full picture of where the missing carbon dioxide is. The answer is basically in the plants where they're emitted, with some of it escaping elsewhere. And so there's no emergency. If anything, we need more dioxide to fuel the biological cycle, and we can increase productivity of farming, basically.
Yeah, see, that's a big one. Yeah, like just to
Yeah.
hone in on that, like we actually need more CO2, which just even saying that is like mind bending for some people. You know, they sort of melt.
For some people,
yeah. I think that's fascinating.
So I would put a caveat on that. We do not want it from topsoil loss, which gets me to the environmental crisis.
Hold on, let me just quickly, sorry, I can edit this. I just need to turn on the light. 1 second. There we go. The sun's been setting as we've been chatting and it's got dark. Cool. All right, carry on, man.
So this gets us to in the environmental crisis. Topsoil loss actually matters if you value healthy food. It's very important when you're growing food to have a thriving topsoil with lots and lots of biology inside it. And killing soils like we are doing with industrialized farming currently by applying fertilizers and pesticides, in particular, insecticides and herbicides, those things are absolutely devastating our soils. And the erosion tied to tilling and the lack of water harvesting on fields is actually a genuine environmental concern that we absolutely need to address. And more to the point, it actually affects the climate. And this is very few people understand this in the climate skeptic camp. So how does it do that? It basically, when you have soil with lower carbon, like if you are a gardener, increasing the soil carbon in your garden by 1% allows you to soak up a 10-liter watering can into 1 square meter, give or take. So it's a huge amount of water. And so this multiplied by the amount of like the size of your field is absolutely phenomenal. There's another thing which is tied to plantations. Soil with no cover, the less cover, holds less water because the sun taps directly into it, and because there's nothing to block the sun heat, that evaporates the soil water, and this has an effect on the soil, which is it evaporates, and then the soil acts as a sponge, and it brings the water from underneath inside back to the surface, and so you are also drawing the lower levels of your soil, and as the water creeps up, it also brings salt inside the it brings salt up, which is another terrible problem in its own right. So anyway, this creates runoffs. Basically, when the soil does not retain enough water, you get runoffs and you get water evaporation. It's one or the other. And when you have dry soil, it creates warm, hot air, basically. And the hot air becomes pressurized, and so that creates a high pressure zone. And when you have moist air coming from the sea, that cannot go through, it cannot come inland. And this is spectacular when you go in places like Southern California, for instance. You can see the difference when you're in, say, in Santa Barbara, where you have a lovely mist on the coast, and then you go inland a little bit, and then it's super hot and very dry. Some humidity, but really not that much. And when you go into the Central Valley, they're irrigating, so you have all this moisture that is which is an actual greenhouse effect in passing. Water vapor is a greenhouse effect. Like anyone who doubts that, just go to California and the Central Valley, and you'll see it firsthand. Just and so the moisture basically doesn't come inland, so that creates less rain most of the time, unless the pressure is very high, in which case you have a big storm, and then it just washes off on the landscape. And because the water doesn't, there's no water retention, then all of the water runs off again, and so you get floods basically. So it's a cycle of droughts and floods, and that's called desertification. Desertification is very easy. I mean, very easy. No, it's straightforward to reverse. Essentially, you want to harvest water and to slow it down, and to slow down the wind as well, using plants or using windbreaks. There are some spectacular examples of landscape regeneration nowadays. The Lewis Plateau is it's an area which is it's slightly smaller than New Jersey, that they regenerated. It was all deserted, like in the screen, and now it's just a lush landscape. One of the super productive landscape in China nowadays. They completely restored the area. So there's this link on reverse is an example where they took one of the driest regions in the world, which is southern Saudi Arabia and Al-Qaeda, and that's an area that gets like 3 millimeters of rain. They're happy in 1 year, and they're basically regreening the desert. It was completely barren, and they're regreening that area of all places, like 3 millimeters of water. That's all. My sense that bulldozers, seed pellets, and fences would completely transform landscapes in no time. This here is an example in Tucson, Arizona. It's the mound in the middle is a Depression era swale. So it's a swale is basically a small mound that is used to block water and slow it down so that it can sink beneath the mound or in front of the mound. The trees to the left, the arrow represents the water flow. The trees to the left are self-seeded. This is wind carrying seeds that I don't know the history of that. Just know that they were there during that they were made during the Depression era, and then they were completely abandoned, so no one touched them. So completely self-seeded. It's a bit of a mecca in permaculture circles, where like just about every person in permaculture that matters, they basically went there to do like to go see it in effect, basically. Um, uh, so bulldozers, that's enough to harvest water. It's fire and forget. Seed pellets, you could create seed pellets. This is used by guerrilla gardeners in empty lots in cities. That toss a cherry tree in there, and then you can harvest the cherries a couple of years later. Seed pellets, they work basically. We could use drones to seed trees large scale after after creating mounds using bulldozers, and some fencing. The fencing is important as well in areas with grazers like deers. Else the deers, they eat the saplings, so you just fence them out for a couple of years to keep the deers out, and then you remove the fences, and you're good to go. We could completely transform landscapes this way. Natural calamities are also man-made. These are tied to poor land stewardship. Anyone curious about this, just go visit the links. It's basically tied to poor water harvesting in both cases. We've just seen the cycle of droughts and floods. When it's dry, you're going to get fire. When it's drying landscape, you're going to get floods. If you reverse that, then you're retaining water that limits the flood, and that humidifies the landscape, that adds moisture to the landscape, which prevents the fires as well. So it's really just a poor land stewardship problem. There are other factors such as, like, there's something to be said about aircraft that are literally spraying coal fly ash above our heads. And those are killing trees. Like, this is a special interesting articles for those who are not familiar with this. And subsidized flood insurance. Like, you know, when you have lots of people who congregate in an area, and you have subsidized flood insurance, of course you're going to have flood damage, right? That's the reason. So yeah, that's a bit weird. Mass extinction is also man-made, and this time it's habitat loss. But at the same time, this deserves a little pause here. Species loss is a concern, but only in so much as they are cornered. Nothing is less convincing about the extinction crisis than, say, an insect specialist who said, well, we're all going to die, we're all going to die, and then describes the insect apocalypse. And then for one half of his presentation, and then the other half is like, well, yeah, you could rewild your garden, and then that creates insect habitat. And then, like, dude, you just said that it was absolutely, like, we're all going to die, and then you're telling me that we just need to give them a little bit of habitat, and actually the insects are fine. That doesn't, like, there's a cognitive dissonance here that needs to be pointed out. In reality, it's actually about a land grab. It's a conservancy-led, it's the biggest land grab in history. And it's based on an authoritarian inversion of reality, which is worth pointing out. Farming and conservation are really two opposing sides of a coin. It's an authoritarian relationship with nature, if you will. The farmer is going to, or the plantation operator, I should say, the plantation operator is going to completely obliterate and raise nature, right? And they're going to set up their field without leaving any room for nature itself, which would be like the hedgerows, for instance, which are unexploited, or in this case, they can be exploited, as we're about to see. You can actually work with nature with all of the facets, but the way industrial plantations work nowadays on current landscapes, you just raise everything. There's no room for wildlife, essentially. And at the opposite end of that, you have people who are advocating, we must make no room for man whatsoever. Like, just let nature do its thing and fetishize it like a statue, really, like a museum. And you're not allowed to go in there, and it's a very patriarchal approach to nature, as at that, like, you're only supposed to go to say Yosemite, for instance. They only let so many people in, and you have to park in very restricted you park in some areas, you camp in other areas, you're not allowed to go in this and that area, you need to take your trash, blah blah. Like, which is probably a good thing in the latter case, but it's very, very, very regimented. And the idea is that you cannot have a relationship with nature on equal footing. You're either above it and destroying it, or you're beneath it and worshiping it. And this absolutely needs to be pointed out, that hence the religious aspect that I mentioned earlier. Nature actually self-organizes holistically. This means that it doesn't optimize for output. It actually optimizes for minimal input and waste. And so the waste reuse, in fact. So one species waste is another one's input. And so there's no waste overall in the system, and very little energy is needed for nature to be productive. And this is how you get and you can actually organize and build a landscape this way, which is what permaculture is about. But you don't need to go to the extreme of permaculture either. You can also, you can keep the plantation while leaving some context, such as hedgerows on each side in an alley cropping system or something to that effect. And so you leave some room for wildlife where they would be no longer cornered and fine. So there's a fundamental misunderstanding of conservationists about how to manage a landscape and how to steward nature, really. And it's a very deliberate thing. I think it is an integral part of the PSYOP. So the only real concerns in the end is stopping the agenda, like pollution, of course, but also the agenda. So how to get involved? So these are my ideas on the topic, grown from my own background and my own context. I'm an engineer. I've studied psychology. I've studied law a bit. There's a growing public awareness. It's a contract-based coup, which depends on consent. My sense that there's, like in any contract, there's three power levels. Like you have coercion, like you force someone to sign, like stick a gun to your face and like sign this, please. That's coercion. So there's a lot of coercion, and their main angle to coerce people is basically food sovereignty. They're slaughtering. It's a global assault on the food supply, where they're trying to get the chickens registered. They're trying to force people to buy their food, basically, and to depend on them for their water. You're not allowed to harvest water in some areas in the United States. There's all sorts of shenanigans going on, so that people depend on them for their food, for their water, for their energy. Local communities could be harvesting a lot of energy if they were harvesting more water, basically, and they would do that using hydraulic trumps, basically. And there's also all sorts of developments that they're trying to suppress in low energy nuclear reactions. Mike Adams made a recent interview on that on decentralized TV for those who are interested in that topic, which is very interesting. Then there's the framework that they also control, which is the legal framework and the currency. So in the legal framework, my sense that truth will prevail eventually, because you have to get remedy at some point, and so you just challenge them to get truth. And there's also something that's easily forgotten, is that the ultimate judicial power is in our hands, and we the people. You can use jury annulment, like if you get called in as a jury for any reason, you can always find not guilty and just stay stubborn about it if you want to be a pain in the ass, and just nope, not guilty. And with enough precedents, then the law becomes inapplicable, because there's too many precedents that said, no, actually the jury found that this was not applicable. So basically, you can use a legal system against it, basically. And for currencies, there's local alternatives, such as local currencies, crypto, of course. I'm not too sure about crypto myself, or for that matter, but that will be another talk another day. Just something to know when resisting is that you can put pressure on key enforcers by spreading the truth around them. So like if someone is mandating something in a school, say, or in a community, you can always tell their neighbors, tell their colleagues, like spread the truth around them. And at some point, if what they're doing is really awful, then they have to face up to reality that everyone around them knows that they're doing something absolutely awful and stare like, gazes all day long. And if you can't get the top enforcers, like the key enablers, then go for the lieutenants just beneath them, because they can't manage everything themselves. So if you go if you go after the line managers, you'll get non-compliance and non-enforcement in your community. I'm pretty sure this will. I've been lucky. I've been privileged that we're in an area where we never had to deal with any of this. But I'm pretty sure this would work in Europe, like if they try the 2020 shenanigans again. As to communication, I'd like to highlight that factual information does not move demoralized people. Truth bombs just makes them angry. So there's really no point in offering like counter arguments and things like that. They need to do the work. They need to find this themselves. And my sense is that we can use the problem reaction solution model that they are using against them. And the way to do that is to highlight solutions, which is why I put so much effort in my own work. Is that it's one thing to to tell people, well, no, sorry, carbon dioxide has no effect on the climate, blah blah blah. But if they're in their mental model where, oh my God, there's catastrophe and we need to do something about it, then that's not helpful, because first off, they're going to be angry. They're not going to listen to you. They're going to dismiss you. They're going to attack you, like name call you and everything. But if you put solutions in front of them, then they're like, yeah, actually that does make sense. Then we can actually work on that. And if the solutions happen to be working against the global coup that is ongoing, then maybe that can move the needle in the direction where the propagandists absolutely do not want this to go. And my sense is that climate activists, like, you can get them to work on food sovereignty. In fact, a lot of them do. A lot of them are working on, like, I got into this at the end of the day because of environmental activism. I got to work into food sovereignty, and like, lo and behold, once you start working on these things and you start understanding what's actually going on, you're like, hold on, there's a dissonance here, another dissonance there, another dissonance here, and it seems to me that this is far more effective than blocking streets. And part of why is that huge amounts of energy actually go into the food system. There's the carbon dioxide that I mentioned, but you don't even need to tell that to them. Just highlight the energy signature of like producing a chicken egg or something like that. Like, it's, and those are what the links are about, by the way. It's absolutely bonkers. And so if you have instead a chicken in your backyard, then that's that much carbon dioxide. Like, so when next time you see someone blocking streets, like, tell them, like, dude, if you want to make a difference, tell people how to garden. Go teach kids at school how to garden, because that's actually useful. First off, it's productive. It's less carbon dioxide for all of their families, and you don't need to believe a word about what they're, about the carbon dioxide narrative. It doesn't matter. They won't believe you anyway if you tell them it's all bullshit. But if you do tell them, like, here's a solution that you can actually implement and you can actually move the needle. Here, you're just wasting everyone's time by blocking the street. Go teach kids gardening at school. They will produce some potatoes at home, and that's that much less carbon dioxide that's out of the atmosphere. And eventually they will figure it out, my sense is, because they will, start making progress and gain hope. Now, the last thing I'd like to conclude on is I'm organizing a crowdsourced legal campaign. So this is at the time of this chat, it's still very much at its inception. But I've tried to publish this research in several journals, and so far I have always been rebuffed. Basically, they told me to go away, and that it was not interesting, or not this, that, and this. So I'm being censored. I'm still trying. I'm still working on the amending a paper, and I intend to continue that. But so far, no success. And I haven't had any success either by reaching out to news outlets, be them corporate or, for that matter, some independent news outlets did pick up on what I was doing, but very few of them. So there's clear-cut accounting fraud, and it's straightforward to understand. I hope this presentation was very clear to everyone. It's straightforward to lay out in a courtroom. And my sense is that the corruption that is tied to the carbon accounting fraud makes it absolutely indefensible in court. So my sense is that we can actually attack them based on that. And so there's several angles that we can use. One is to confront the key enablers, because they are technically enabling a global land theft and murder, like straight up murder in places like Africa. And of course, there's the nonsense from the past 3 years, which is ongoing, which we could probably also pin on them. And just confront them with the facts. Now, what the cease and desist letter does is it precludes you from saying later in court that you did not know, because you received the letter and you opened it. You accepted the letter and you opened it. So then you cannot declare, because of that cease and desist letter, well, sorry, I didn't know, or I wasn't aware. And so this works for medical propaganda as well, by the way. You can also repeal climate policies. When you confront the climate policies in court and say, well, yes, but you want to build this pipeline here to transport carbon dioxide, but actually you need to demonstrate that this is useful to justify stealing my land, right? You can't just take my land and say it's to build this pipeline. This is absolutely indispensable. The burden of proof is on them to show that it actually is indispensable. Now, when you argue the science, they can always argue, well, yes, but there's a doubt, right? So the precaution principle is going to apply because there's reason for concern that we should actually be taking all of these steps. And I'm 100% sure that they will try that approach. But if you attack the attribution science instead, then you are basically putting their nose into their manure and like, hello, why are you ignoring all of these carbon emissions here? And why are you ignoring all of these carbon emissions there? And these carbon emissions here are like a drop in the ocean. Why should we be caring about this? And I think that will, it puts us in basically the same position as challenging things like contagion in court for medical propaganda. It's the one thing that they do not want to hear about in court. You challenge them on that, they go, no, we're just going to drop your case. And they dismiss the case. So I'm already in touch with a couple of indigenous rights groups in Africa and in Latin America. I'm looking for more. I'd love some help, by the way, if people are interested in helping, to try to reach out to more of them. My sense is that by challenging these carbon offset related land grabs, then we can detonate green finance. Another thing we can do for green finance is we can send cease and desist letters to green funds. So for instance, if you are an investor and you have money invested in, for whatever reason, say, because you watch this podcast and you decide, no, that's a good idea, I'll put $100 in there. If you have some money invested in a green fund, I'd love to work on starting a class action lawsuit in the United States, because that's where you can do class action lawsuits. So we would start by sending cease and desist letters to all of the big finance institutions, so all the insurance businesses, all the Vanguard, BlackRock, all of them, and send a a glorified cease and desist letter. You are committing carbon accounting fraud, which I'm sure, I hope there is at least one jurisdiction in the US where you can construe that as actual accounting fraud through some legalese, and I suspect that at minimum we can get the attention of the legal department, and by having the legal department tell the marketing department, hey, actually we can't say that, it's not as green as we claim it is, so you need to construe the language here, and that would create a mess all over the place. But my sense is that we could actually detonate the green finance monster that way. And if we do that, then we cut all the funding, because they really depend on this funding at the end of the day. If we cut that infrastructure from them, if we cut their ability to sell carbon offsets by stealing land, and to fund green technology and green investments through BlackRock, Vanguard, and others, then it might not stop them, but it will allow us to at minimum, it allows us to gain time. Anyway, so if anyone wants to contribute, I started a Telegram channel, which at the time of writing, at the time of this discussion, has almost no one. But by all means, join if you want to. If you feel like participating, you can also support at this URL if you want to do that as well. Here's some useful links. If you'd like to help spread the word. The first one is a short article, which is highly editorialized, which goes through this what's in this presentation, but in a shorter version. The second one is more scientific in nature, non-editorialized, and this is the one that I'm currently trying to get through peer review. I need to update it, but it's there. The third one is the full-length article, which this presentation was originally based on. And the last one is a Git repository with the printable documents in this deck. Thanks for your time.
Awesome, Dennis. Thank you for sharing that. I've really been just enjoying going on a journey and taking in all the information, and I'm sure people are going to love your presentation here. And yeah, big ups to what you're doing. Keep doing everything you are.
Do you want to, if you have any questions?